Okay. So good morning, everybody. Like that slide says, please do feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. That helps us and our speakers understand how to cater the content today, where people are coming from, where they're located, what they do. So please put that information. Also, we usually do a poll to gauge kind of how familiar people are with that, but due to some Zoom software updates, we're having some issues with that. So maybe in lieu of that, just rank on a scale of 1 to 5 how familiar you are with the fall covers program, with 5 being very familiar and 1 being not familiar at all. So again, please do put your name, organization, occupation, and location in the chat. And so, Rachel, do we have that intro slide?
Yeah, that's this one.
Oh, okay, we're starting here. Perfect.
Yeah.
Yep, no problem. So good morning, everybody. Again, welcome to the Illinois Sustainable Ag Partnership monthly ICCON calls, where we explore the latest conservation research, policy, and agronomy management. My name is Frank Rademacher. I'm the conservation agronomist for the Illinois Nature Conservancy, and I'll be hosting the call today. And so this is our first call back from the spring planting break that we usually take. So we hope you all had a successful spring, despite some of the significant weather challenges that some places faced. And so, as part of this series, a lot of those that have been here for a while know that we try to grab our policy folks once or twice a year, really just for an update on what's going on. And so today we'll hear about a variety of recent topics that will impact Illinois conservation. So today we're joined by Dr. Corey Lacey. He's the Environmental Policy Manager for the Illinois Soybean Association. Dylan Cook, the Midwest Policy Manager for American Farmland Trust. And I think we're also going to be joined, if he's not in here already, by Michael Woods, who is the Executive Director of the Association of Illinois Soil and Water Conservation Districts. So today we'll primarily be hearing about the fall covers for spring savings program, and then some of the status of the SWCD funding, and then possibly some general farm bill topics as well. Okay, so Rachel, would you go to that next slide? Oh, so before we kick into content, just a little bit more detail for this call. So again, policy change is really quick, and sometimes it feels a little bit opaque. And so to better understand some of that, Dr. Corey Lacey, Dylan Cook, and Michael Woods will be talking some about those issues that I mentioned today, specifically how the fall covers program is shaping up, and then those budget cuts that we recently heard about. And so again, we will have a Q&A discussion period at the end of this presentation. So as we go through, please do put your questions, comments in chat, either the public chat or moderate or message our moderators, and we can ask those at the end. So I think at this point, I'll kick it off to our speakers. It looks like we've got Corey up first.
I'm muted. I think we have Dylan up first.
Oh,
because Dylan's got to go.
Yeah, so. Why don't I jump in? All right, thanks for getting those slides up, Rachel, and thanks for the introduction. Frank, again, my name is Dylan Cook. I'm the Midwest Policy Manager for American Farmland Trust based in Bloomington. And going to start us off here today by talking about the fall covers for spring savings program here in Illinois. Thank you for sticking your familiarity numbers there in the chat. That helps give me an understanding of where folks are at. And I think what we're going to do is just kind of run through some basic mechanics of the program, how it works, goals of the program, and where it sits now, and what we see as opportunities looking forward. So if we can jump to the next slide, Rachel. Did that one switch on your guys' end?
I'm not seeing a switch on my end.
Okay. We'll give it a moment.
It looks like we lost Rachel.
I was gonna say this is my third Zoom meeting this morning, and like all Zoom seems to just be having problems across the board with whatever update happened. It's interesting.
It sounds like there were some update issues, polls too. All right, I think we're back in. I think we're back in business. Thanks, Rachel, and thanks for patience, everybody there. Basic mechanics of the fall covers for spring savings program. It was designed from the get-go to be very simple, very low administrative burden on those handling the back end of the program, and also a low barrier for participation for farmers. It was designed to be simple and effective. And the way it works is provides a $5 an acre reduction or discount on a farmer's crop insurance bill the year following the program enrollment. So what that timeline looks like is, this fall, farmer can go out, get their cover crop in. They do need to certify those acres on their FSA 578 form, and then go through a pretty simple, what is even more simple now, online application process through IDOA. And once those acres are submitted through the IDOA online portal, uh, they're verified, and the following year, when the farmer receives a crop insurance bill, that discount is reflected for those acres that were certified. It's important that to know that this operates through a MOU between IDOA and RMA. So the funds are transferred between those two entities. Farmer receives the discount reflected on their crop insurance. And then, a couple other things to note about the program is that it's stackable as a public program. It is stackable with the host of private incentives that exist out there for cover crops as well, be it for water quality or carbon reduction. And that makes it a compelling addition to a number of different programs that exist. An important point, and we'll kind of get into this later, is that $1 per acre is provided to local soil and water conservation districts here in Illinois for spot checking of those acres. There's the verification on the 578, but also good to have eyes on there and get boots out there to verify that those acres are in place, and planted accordingly. And we jump over to the next slide. I'll talk a little bit about where this came from and what the goals of the program were from the outset. And that first one, I think everybody on this call understands, and increased cover crop adoption in Illinois. The stakeholders that came together to form this program were circling around the nutrient loss reduction strategy policy working group and partners. And it was a really wide group of stakeholders in 2018, 2019. Some of the folks on this call, some of the organizations on this call, and others not. But the idea was to find as I mentioned, a low barrier to entry, easy to administer, cost-effective cost share program that could provide some incentive for farmers to adopt cover crops. The idea that undergirded it, using crop insurance, was that cover crops could be a risk reduction tool. That in years of drought, there's the ability to hold some moisture. In years of heavy rains, they can help mitigate some of those prevented plant losses. That was an idea 7, 8, 10 years ago, and in a bit, I'll get into what we're seeing and how that's playing out over time. Obviously, the other benefits, those of you familiar with cover crops know, improved soil health, carbon sequestration, and of course that climate resiliency component. Jump to the next slide quick. And this kind of provides it in a nutshell. I'll hit on some high points. I won't go through all of the numbers, but it was funded first in 2019, which meant that the 2020 crop year was the first where those discounts were seen. And at the outset, it was small and it was modest. It was 50,000 acres funded at 300,000 acres. Again, $5 an acre to the farmer, $1 to the local SWCD. And you can see over the years, it's gradually increased. 2022, it bumped up to 100,000 acres. I'll note there on 2023, we had a couple of very interesting things happen in Illinois. One, the IEPA was able to leverage a little bit of Gulf Hypoxia Task Force funds as a little bit of federal match to partner with the state in expanding these acres. They kicked in $200,000 that year, which gave us another 40,000 acres. And you'll see 160 to 140, 23 to 24. Another thing became aware in 2023 became aware to everybody in the working group, and that was that there were some backed up funds that RMA, some unadministered funds, some unspent funds, and so they found this extra a few dollars and brought it up to 160,000 acres, an extra 20K in 2023. This past year, we dropped back down. We didn't have that couch cushion money. We dropped back down to 140,000 acres in Illinois, and like in years past, it was spoken for in a decreasing amount of time. In 2020, it took us about 12 days to fill up those first 50,000 acres. And in this past sign-up year in 2024, it took us 38 minutes to fill up those 140,000 acres available in the program. And so now we're looking through to 2025, and as a result of the work of a lot of folks on this call, we got another 50,000 acres from the state added to the fund. And so we've got 150,000 acres as a baseline. Those Gulf Hypoxia Task Force funds are a little bit in limbo. We'll have a little more visibility this fall, and we're confident, given the shot in the arm that Gulf Hypoxia Task Force funds got from the feds a few years ago. We're confident that we'll see some match there, but we'll have a little bit better visibility in the fall. Regardless, we've got a baseline of 150,000 acres for the 2025 sign-up year. As you can see, participating counties has increased each year. Time for enrollment has decreased, and we're also seeing the environmental outcomes that were a part of that original intent: nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment load reductions across the board. One good note is after the 2023 year, the program crossed 1 million pounds of nitrate nitrogen reduction cumulatively through the lifetime of the program. As you can see, it's ramping up, and we expect even more benefit in the 2025 sign-up period. So that's the program in a nutshell. I will note that to calculate those outcomes, we used some really good work from the NLRS Science Committee, as well as a few other resources. Happy to speak on that further. For now, we can jump to the next slide. And so this puts it in perspective, and where fall covers for spring savings sits with all the other cover crops going on in Illinois. As you'll see, that farthest bar, that comes from Optus. It's a satellite imagery outfit that looks at cover crops around the state. And we're sitting around 1.2 million, according to that satellite imagery, statewide. The big jump you see in 2019, that tallest bar, that was a prevent plant year, where we saw a lot of cover crops across Illinois and across the Midwest. As you look towards the front of this graph, you'll see NRCS, FCSS, and PCCP. NRCS is the different cost share programs available through the USDA. Fall covers for spring savings, you can see how that's grown in the last couple of years. And I will note that that third row back, PCCP, that stands for the Pandemic Cover Crop Program, which was a federal counterpart to this state-based program. Both of those, PCCP and fall covers for spring savings, have had a really big impact on that fifth column back. And this might be a little difficult to read. I apologize if it is, but FSA certified acres. That gives us a really good idea of exactly where and what fields were getting planted and where farmers are certifying those acres. As you can see, as those two programs have jumped, we've seen an increase in the certified acres. But this gives you an idea of where the different cost share programs sit in relation to our overall cover crop adoption in Illinois. Jump to the next slide quick. And as I mentioned at the outset, one of the goals was to reward farmers to provide a discount for what was this burgeoning idea 7 or 8 years ago, which was cover crops can help promote resiliency on farm. Its soil health can help reduce indemnities through crop insurance, and that's why that $5 an acre discount was there. And lo and behold, the research is starting to verify that early thought. I mentioned 2019, there was a year of prevent plant loss across the Midwest because of some high rains. And through some really innovative research, the Agree Coalition ended up finding that cover crops and no-till resulted in a 24% reduction in the odds ratio of prevent plant loss in that year. So just starting to see the results of this. Again, it's important that we have the data through those 578 forms so that we can work with RMA to understand what the impacts of cover crops are on crop insurance. But we're starting to see good signs. And it's why we think it's important to continue promoting this program and getting acres enrolled. We can, as we spread the incentives out, we see different crops, weather patterns, topography, and that helps build the data sets which can corroborate or inform those crop insurance discounts or the impact that these conservation practices have on RMA, have on insurance providers, which are wary of the practice sometimes. And so we're glad to see that the data is bearing out. This last slide we can jump to, I think is important as well. It's some difficult information, but I think it's good for all of us to keep in mind. Up there at the top, NLRS scenario NP8. That is an idea of, hey, if we want to meet our nutrient loss reduction goals, we're going to have a whole host of different practices on the ground at different rates in different locations, and one of those being cover crops. We need a set number of acres. Now, if we're going to meet targets by 2035, which is an unofficial but hopeful target, that green bar in the back shows what kind of cover crop adoption is going to be necessary. And as you can see, compared to Optus and the FSA certified acres and those earlier bars, we're making progress, but we really need to ramp up here in Illinois. And and it's not just Illinois, it's around the Midwest, to reach some of these goals. Um, and it's going to take, as you can see down there at the bottom, it's going to take more than the NRCS cost share programs. It's going to take local and state investment. And we continue to believe, because of how farmers have gravitated towards this program and what they've how the success that we've seen, essentially, that fall covers continues to be one of the best mechanisms that we have in Illinois. But the truth is that all of these efforts through fall covers for spring savings, because of the role that soil and water conservation districts play in verifying those acres, or through the NRCS programs, which soil and water conservation districts help to engage farmers with. We're gonna need them as partners going forward if we're gonna make a good stab at that graph in the back, that scenario total cover crop acres, and ramping up to meet there. And so with that, I'm gonna leave off on fall covers. I hope that was somewhat helpful for those of you who are familiar with, or not familiar with the program, and happy to take any quick questions. As Corey mentioned, I will have to jump off, but certainly want to hand it off to both he and Michael to talk about Farm Bill and the role that soil and water conservation districts play here.
Dylan, thanks. I'm just going to, there are some questions in the chat that I want you to get to. I did want to make one point on your slide. I had a conversation with EPA yesterday, Illinois EPA, and they confirmed, almost certain that they will get the 200,000 for fall covers. So that will put the overall program at somewhere probably, over 200K acres total, which is double what we were in 2022. So there is growth in the program, which I think is important to highlight.
Yeah, that's a great point. Good flag, Corey.
Yeah. So I don't know, are you where you can see the chat, Dylan, or do you want me to read the chat questions to you?
I am. Yeah. Well, can you, Corey? I've got a few.
Yeah, that's fine. So one person asked, can you make the PowerPoint available? I'm assuming that that's possible.
Of course. Yep.
And then, how is nitrogen and phosphorus removed with these programs measured? And Helen made a comment about some details, but do you want to comment on how that model is working, or expand a little bit more?
How we're how phosphorus and nitrogen are being removed with or how it's measured?
Yeah,
Sorry.
the question was, how is nitrogen and phosphorus removed with these programs measured? I'm assuming that that's a reference to the model.
Oh, yep.
And Helen put a link to the AFT's tool.
Yep. So this was a tool created by AFT in partnership with some other folks called Peacock, and project like County Outcomes Calculator. And so what we did is take the science assessment used by the Illinois Nutrient Loss Reduction Strategy. We added transect survey data, ag census data, and then a geospatial data gateway. It's listed on that slide. And I think there's others who can speak more to the science there better than I can. But essentially, this was us taking Illinois science assessment data, plugging it in based on where and how many acres were adopted in those counties.
Rachel, maybe can you pull up the slides again real fast for us? I think it was Rachel that was actually presenting the PowerPoint.
We may have lost Rachel again, so
okay, well then we won't do that. That's okay. Oh,
well, and I'd be happy to share a little bit more on the science that goes into that Peacock tool, that Peacock calculator. I don't have it right here in front of me, but I'm happy to follow up with some of the literature and information that supports that tool.
Yeah, and I think maybe since Helen has everyone's contact and knows who's on, she could probably follow up similarly. And I see Helen has the PowerPoint up. One of the questions was, why is Southern Illinois lagging in cover crop adoption generally? I think that's in reference to how these maps are presented. Leah, is that why you asked that question? Because you were
Yeah.
looking at these maps?
Exactly.
Yeah. Does anyone want to comment on that? I know there was some explanation there that it's acres enrolled, as opposed to actual cover crop acres. So I do kind of wonder if you mapped actual cover crop acres like via satellite imagery, if that would hold as true versus this is acres enrolled in the actual program, which certain counties may just have a more targeted enrollment, maybe due to some soil and water conservation district leadership in those counties.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it, Corey. When we look at the Optus data, that satellite imagery, we do see a more even spread of cover crops. But with this program, and that's what these maps demonstrate, with this program, these are where those acres are enrolled. And to Corey's point, that really has to do with the leadership of the soil and water conservation districts in those areas. And how they're able to bring farmers into the program.
Dylan, I know you were pressing for time, so if you have to drop, just feel free. I'm going to keep the conversation going. One question was, why do you think NRCS cost share programs have not been as successful or popular as other programs? What makes other cover crop cost share programs more attractive? I found this interesting, especially in light of a webinar we hosted this morning, in the Maryland Bay area, where the comment was made that most of their, not the Maryland Bay, the Chesapeake Bay, where the comment was made by the presenter that the majority of farmers are receiving between a $45 and a $95 cost share for cover cropping. And of those farmers, almost none of it is equip dollars. It is almost all a state funded program because it's easier to enroll. I don't know if that's the final answer, but that would be my comment, is that NRCS programs there's a hurdle to enrollment that soil and water conservation districts can have happily soil and water conservation districts can happily help with, for sure, but there is that challenge. So I don't know if anyone else has any thoughts on why there's a lag with NRCS cost share compared to other programs, but that would be my answer.
Some of it, Corey, I may add, is staffing. There's a lack of staffing on the front line, boots on the ground, helping to put those programs into play. And that's one of the vital issues we'll continue to advocate for, is when you have staff turnaround or staff reductions, it has a direct impact on the implementation of cost share programs.
I think both of those points hold, and I kind of think that's a natural transition over to you, Michael and Corey, on soil and water conservation districts and the status there. As Corey mentioned, I do have to jump off. I really appreciate the chance to join you all this morning, and happy to share the PowerPoint and follow up with any other questions. Feel free to reach out. Thank you all.
Michael, I'll let you set the ground stage for what's going on with the districts and in that scope. I see you're now sharing your screen, so that's a great start.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. And I really appreciate having this opportunity to engage with our friends across the state that are interested in advancing and supporting our soil and water conservation districts. Just a little bit of background, just so you know, and this may be a little bit of recapping and sort of preaching to the choir, but I just want to make sure you all know we have 97 soil and water conservation districts that serve all 102 counties. We have a few multi-counties that come together to create a district. We this year had requested to have $10.5 million dedicated to the Partners for Conservation Fund, specifically dedicated to the operations to support those 97 districts. Last year, the funding, as you can see on this table that I have up in front of you here, last year in 2024, there was $8.5 million dedicated to the Ops Fund, and there was $3 million dedicated to the cost share. Just so to clarify, the reality is there was $9 million dedicated to Ops, and they took $500,000 of that to give towards the SWCD insurance program. Every year they allocate $1 million. And so they took $500,000 from the ops fund and $500,000 from the cost share program to cover or to put towards the insurance program. This year we were asking specifically for 10.5 million. And the reason is because we simply have lagging behind significantly when it comes to salaries and to attract that frontline boots on the ground conservation, resource conservationist as well as administrative coordinator. Currently in the state of Illinois, the average income is $54,338. Many of our boots on the ground frontline conservation staff, start out and are in that $40,000 range. And these are individuals with bachelor's degrees, master's degrees in conservation, and they simply are not keeping par with the state of pay for jobs across the state of Illinois. As I often reference, I was driving by a big box store the other day, and they were offering $25 an hour. That's $52,000 a year for anybody that maybe doesn't even have the education level to go in and work at a big box store, whereas to be in the frontline boots on the ground to help support our local producers and our communities implement conservation, we were lagging behind. We also have an insurance program that is not very suitable. That $1 million they dedicate basically allocated roughly on average $900 per employee. And then they have to pay usually a lot of times, $700, $800, $900, depending on their classification of their insurance program. And it was not suitable for their dependents to even join onto the insurance program. So if you can imagine trying to retain frontline boots on the ground, quality SWCD staff, we need to address the pay disparity, and we need to address the fact that we need to provide benefits for individuals and their families in their communities. So that's why we asked for the 10.5. It was a slight bump from the prior year of the 8.5. So we were asking for that increase. The Department of Ag, or the governor's budget, the proposed initial budget put in at 4.5 million. And we were going against that. We were trying to say, no, we need to get this up to 10.5. So they dropped it automatically by dropping 4 million. We were out advocating. We had many of our friends on this call, many of our organizations across the state advocating for this. But what I find interesting is when you look at the funds that come out of the Partners for Conservation Fund, the only line item that was reduced significantly by 48% was funding to the boots on the ground conservationist. And it held. We did not get the bump ultimately as they had in previous years. So you can see here historically, this 4.5 takes us back in line with funding that was allocated to the ops back in 1996. Now, times have changed. The current administration wants to reference the Rauner administration zeroed it out in 2016. Remember, that actually started in 2015 because the 2015 budget was started in 2014. So this started on July 1st, 2015. That was nearly 10 years ago. And we're saying, yes, that happened, but let's move forward into 2025 and let's talk about today. This is going to have a significant impact on our front line. This is cutting us almost 50%. We have a continued increase in demand of expectations. On a federal level, we have more federal funds coming out for conservation. Illinois continues to lag behind in bringing those dollars into the state, and will do so even more so when you don't have frontline boots on the ground, because these are the folks that work with conservation implementation. Also, we know that conservation is not happens on a monthly basis or a daily basis. It can take many years to build up to implementation of various practices, whether building a watershed, building terraces, even to just put cover crops onto the ground. It's not an annual issue. It could be upwards to 2 or 3 years to build the relationships with a producer or to fit into their crop rotation to be able to put those cover crops in. So this is a long-term issue. My concern is these funding cuts are going to be intergenerational and cause intergenerational inequity. We will continue to see a downturn. Not only will it have an impact currently with staff turnover or reduction it will have then individuals that will simply say, why would I want to be in this industry when I'm not sure that the funding is secured? So this is a big issue, and it's not something we need to take lightly as an overall operation and overall conservationist. Earlier, Dylan noted about the fall cover spring savings, that yes, $1 is allocated to the spot check. But if the boots on the ground frontline folks are not there, how are we going to get the money into our districts? And so we've got to be able to start addressing that. It is having a significant impact. Let me just give you a quick little overview. We continue to talk about or hear individuals kind of redirect the reason why these things happen, whether it be member-led didn't come through. We had many members advocating for this. We just don't know where the breakdown was. The $14 million that was allocated to PFC this year, of that, 1.8 million, a little over 1.8 million goes to IDOA specifically. As you can see there, it goes into their personnel services, their state employee retirement system, Social Security, group insurance, and so forth. And new this year, they added $250,000 for the soil health assessment that comes out of SB 1701. SB 1701 also has expectations of SWCDs to fulfill those soil health requirements. And so again, if you don't have boots on the ground, it's going to be a little harder for us to do that. Jumping over the blue line, jumping into the other one, there is almost $1 million, $994,700 that go from the PFC funds to the State Cooperative Extension Services Trust Fund. I'm not sure exactly what those dollars are committed to, but I know they go to Extension to provide their support. Going to the bottom section, Illinois Department of Natural Resources also then captures funds. A little over almost $3 million goes directly to ID&R to cover their staff. Their CREP program, their ecosystem-based management for Illinois Natural Resources, and then for ordinary and contingent expenses associated with their Partners for Conservation programming. $1 million is then also taken away from that and given to the Fox Waterway Agency for costs associated with flood control. When you go back to the blue little section, it says 7.5 million, and you'll hear individuals within the administration saying that, well, we have $7.5 million dedicated to SWCDs. In reality, just to clarify, let's break that up. $4.5 million goes to this year for operations fund. Last year, 8.5. That means it's going to drop down from, on average, $86,000 per district to operation funds of being around $46,000. Again, if your average income is $46,000 or so, how are you going to even cover the cost of a single employee, let alone 2 or more employees? $3 million of that 7.5 that they often like to reference goes to landowner cost share programs. Let's make sure that money does not go directly to the SWCDs. It goes to our producers to help support them putting vital conservation into the field. And so just want to make sure we understand how those dollars are broke up. That gives you an idea of where those dollars are allocated and so forth. What I find interesting is of all those groups, the SWCDs are the only group that continually has yo-yo up and down investments that we have to panhandle for, have to justify every year, and we constantly have to track down and lobby for and advocate for. Other groups, not a single cut from them. So what's interesting is we've got to try to figure out how we make sure that people understand where that $14 million really goes and how this will directly impact the front lines boots on the ground. So just wanted to give you those updates. We appreciate it. I'm more than glad to answer any questions or clarify anything that maybe I've said or what we're going to do going forward. I continue to get asked the question, well, how will this directly give me sheer numbers? If we're only getting 52% of the funds from last year, that potentially could mean that we have 48% cut across the board. That could be in staffing, that could be in services, and that could be also in leveraging, bringing federal and or investing state funds across the state. Corey, any other things that you'd like me to address?
No, I think that was good. Leah did ask a question there in the chat. How does this work for people who rent land? Does the owner apply or does the renter? I think that's a great question because it leads into a really broad topic that we discuss all the time in the conservation world, right? Which is owned land versus leased land. And to answer that question, I think the focus is mostly on the farmer, not necessarily the owner, but there is opportunities for the owner as well. But I don't know, Michael, in context of your discussion, do you want to
Sure.
add anything to that?
That's a great question. And I will say that in Illinois, rough numbers is that, 62% of the land farmed is owned by the non-farm or practicing farmer, right? So that means that landowners have got to be brought into the discussion as well. Our SWCD districts, of course, work directly with producers because ultimately they're the ones that tend to put a lot of these practices on. However, with that stated, we work very closely with a lot of landowners as well, whether that be putting CRP land in, trying to put in pollinators, to working with even getting landowners engaged in conversations with their farmer, their renter, to implement practices like cover crops and so forth. So it's a combination of both. And I would say that going forward, it becomes even more prevalent and important that we engage both sides of the production side, because the producers and the landowners together ultimately help to advance the voluntary efforts that we want to continue to advocate for. But the key is voluntary means we have to have implementation. So, that's where we will not have voluntary if we don't have boots on the ground in the front, sharing the story, educating, bringing folks along, again, working with landowners. They may be absentee. They may not even be in the state of Illinois. So these SWCD staff, it takes more work to be able to reach beyond our borders to connect with them about these opportunities. And so, again, I just say that while this is a cut to this FY25 budget, the long-term impact could be significant because conservation is not a happens once a day or make a decision in a week or right when they walk in the office, they make that decision, buy their good and walk out. It takes relationship building over many years to build these activities.
I think that last piece is a good point. Like the challenge of getting someone to adopt any conservation, but cover crops specifically, requires years of relationship, and it requires kind of that hyper local expertise of like, I know you, you know me, I can give you specific examples of your neighbor who are having successes. I can give you specific examples of your neighbor who have had challenges and help you explain that. And that's where I feel like probably the people on this call, but also the soil water conservation districts broadly offer that service. And that's why it's important.
Corey, with that in mind, I might add one little other element. This is one of the few industries that cannot be outsourced and picked up with just going to the internet and doing a search. This takes relationship building. This takes support. This takes access to information. And so that's what our frontline soil and water conservation districts do. They build relationships with vital decision makers to help advance stewardship of their resources, both fiscal as well as natural and natural resources. So I just want to stress that this is not a job that can be outsourced and never can be replaced with just doing a Google search.
Sure. So it's a complicated issue, but the long story short of it is there was approximately a 50% cut to the districts. It's going to result in less conservation and less conservation support on the ground in this state if it's not addressed. I will say that from a policy front, there is a push, I think Michael mentioned, to try to find a supplemental funding solution in veto. So for those of you who aren't policy people, we had Springfield session that happened from January till last month. Then all the legislators go home and do their other jobs. And then at the end of the year, veto session comes up, which is when legislators, I guess for lack of a better word, they get another chance to try to push some stuff through in Springfield. And then alternatively, the governor can veto something and the legislator can override him, hence the term veto session. That calendar came out. I can't remember what the actual dates are, but it's at the end of the year. And so there is an opportunity for the soil water conservation districts to work over the summer with their allies and get some kind of supplemental funding during veto or during lame duck at the end of the year. or at the beginning of next year. I mean, there's a lot of challenges associated with this, but I think that they have to pursue, and anyone who's supportive of soil water conservation districts should encourage them and support them in that. I know Soybean is making plans already on how we can support that effort. The likelihood of that, I know Michael doesn't like it when I say this, but that's an uphill battle to make that happen. And so we also have to think long term. What does policy look like to help stabilize conservation funding in the state? There's a lot of alternatives. I think a lot of people on this call are part of those conversations. I know that it's hard to engage in both non-biased support for conservation adoption and also engage in policy issues, but there is some need for some back and forth on those topics. And maybe before we wrap up with some federal update, I would just welcome, if anyone on the call has thoughts on that kind of funding for conservation, what works, what doesn't. I would just like to hear from people, or just stories about soil water conservation districts. I'm sure people on the call have been engaged with both those topics. I'm gonna fall back on my like teacher days when I was a professor at Purdue and call on people if no one just raises their hand. Just letting you guys know, a warning if no one wants to volunteer on thoughts.
Corey, I might add one little final thing is the reality is these are real humans that live in our communities that are going to be directly impacted. You know, almost 50%, that means it could be 100 people and their families that depend on that income and make a difference in our communities as well, that now may be out of a job, maybe trying to figure out how they're going to make their car payment, their house payment, identify food. Yes, they could collect unemployment, whatever, but these are real people contributing to our tax base, contributing to our economic well-being, and also advancing the vitality of preserving our natural resources. So these are real, and that's what we got to make sure as we bring this story home, that the funding cuts is not just reducing having people that can get more cost share to our farmers, but these are real people in our communities, and many of them are rural communities that depend on these vital positions that stimulate their economy.
Love it. Frank, I saw you react to my joke, so you get to be picked. What are your thoughts?
Oh, thanks. That's what I get for participating. I should know better. No, again, we really appreciate this. I think just as someone who, to say I'm familiar with this, even saying I'm unfamiliar is kind of a stretch, kind of an overstatement. So for somebody who doesn't have a good way to follow this isn't really where I work 100%. How do we follow, what's going on in this space? And then also what's the best way to, obviously I don't want a funding cut for soil and waters. What is the best way to make change as an individual?
So that's a really great question. I am going to do a plug for Illinois soybean growers. That's what we do. So some people may notice that sometimes we're Illinois Soybean Association, sometimes we're Illinois soybean growers. Growers is the membership organization that does things like that does more policy legislator focused initiatives, and it's membership based. And so our members are a key piece of that. I would just say that the same thing applies to the soil and water conservation districts. Be involved in your county board and things like that. But Michael, specifically on how they can support you, do you want to comment on that?
Well, that's a great one. Sign up for our newsletter, get connected with us through the Association of Soil and Water Conservation Districts. It just helps get the information out. You can go to aiswcd.org and sign up for our news blast. Become a member. One of the things we're trying to advance, just like the corn growers and our other ag industry partners, membership is important, because when we can go before legislators and say we have 97 districts, but we also have X thousands of people that are also passionate about retaining this, that helps. So our membership is $25. It's not so much about the money, it's about the people and having those connections, and that's important, because that's how we get that voice out. We are actively working with some some folks even on this call to help elevate what I've been educated on, not just grassroots development, but grass tops development, getting our local elected officials across all aspects of government, whether that be county boards, city councils, mayors, and whatnot, to be fully engaged in understanding the value that soil and water conservation districts offer to their community and their county in a broader context as well, because those individuals can have strong influence on many of our elected officials at the state level to ensure that these dollars. So talking to your mayor, talking to your city council member, your county boards, and letting them know that you think it's important that we get engaged with soil and water conservation districts because they serve a very broad perspective. And then also dispelling the myth. A lot of people just do not understand what, soil and water conservation districts are about. And we need to help understand that our urban communities benefit from the impact and the service as well, just as our rural and our farming community. While one of our significant stakeholders is the farming community, it's not our only, right? We also serve a much broader, every community. We have 1,499 incorporated communities across the state of Illinois. We serve every one of those in one way or another. We serve our 14,000 townships. We serve our 102 counties. But people don't realize that, and we need to make sure that they have a broader awareness. And that's one of the things we're doing internally, but becoming a member, joining our listserv so that you can stay connected is valuable.
I like it. I will just say that I dropped a link to the annual meeting that's July 14th and 16th in Springfield for the Soil Water Conservation Districts. And then with that, I will just offer a couple minutes of federal before I know Frank has to wrap us up. So everyone's probably aware that the Farm Bill happened or is happening. It's been happening for over a year now. We did see a House bill come out. There was some interesting context in it. There was some support for block cover crop programs specifically that might be interesting to this group. It did pass out of committee. In Illinois, we saw 3 of our 4 representatives vote for the Farm Bill: Sorensen, Bost, and Miller. So for context, Sorensen is a Democrat, Bost and Miller are Republicans. And Representative Budzinski did not vote. She voted with the majority of the Democrats on the committee who are in the minority, and said that she had concerns about the Farm Bill, which we totally understand because there were some cuts to, I guess, reassignments of SNAP dollars and things like that will make it challenging moving forward. So for context, the House is controlled by the Republicans, the Senate is controlled by the Democrats, and as a result, what happens in the House is very party line. What happens in the Senate is very party line. And then at some point, those two things have to come together. And so there is a bill moving through the Senate. Bozeman put it forward the other day. There's a lot of framework and discussion on what that looks like. Again, there is this opportunity in the Senate version to have a soil health block grant situation, which again, that would be funding for programs like fall covers for spring savings from federal dollars. That would also be funding for soil and water conservation districts with federal dollars. So a lot of great opportunity there. My forecast is that we'll see a lot of discussion, but we will not see I am not predicting that we will get a Farm Bill done this year, which means that it will likely go into 2025, which means it will be a new Congress. And so we will reset everything. So those of you who have been listening a little bit about Farm Bill discussions over the last year, I would be prepared to hear about it a lot more, and then for a whole reset next year. Now, I could be wrong. There's still an opportunity for a 2024 Farm Bill, but it's going to be really challenging with the political dynamics, which make the elections that I'm sure you're all aware of coming up at the end of this year very important to be considering. The only other thing on the federal level that's kind of a top issue for this group is the Ag FDA bill is going through DC right now. It's going through the House. The Ag FDA bill is the approps bill for USDA and NRCS. Just some high level thoughts. There are cuts in the House version. So for example, there's a $12 million cut to NRCS funding. There's a $4 million cut to RMA, and there's a $5 million cut to FSA. What's important to remember is that those cuts are not on baseline. they're on discretionary funding, so it's people's salaries. So staffing level is, if they go through both houses, both the House and the Senate, it's likely that there will be some small change in staffing. That's roughly like a 5% decrease, so it's not a huge decrease on the federal level. I know $12 million sounds like a lot, and it is, but it's not an uncharacteristically common type cut. Frank, did I wrap that up fast enough? I know I threw that out there really fast.
That's perfect. That's perfect. I don't think we could fit any more content in this call if we tried. So, again, a huge thanks to all of our speakers today. We should have those slides available, like we said, and also, yeah, I think their contact information should be shared as well. So if there are further questions, we can for sure have you reach out to them directly. Rachel, okay, perfect. So just want to go over next events, ISAP events, which you can expect, and then talk about our next calls a little bit. I'm going to kick it over to Rachel Curry. She's going to speak about this event real quick.
Okay, I'll try and be fast. So we're doing the Cultivating Conversations focused on edge of field practices. We're going to have a resource fair, a farmer panel, a brief presentation about the NLRS and the role of edge of field practices on reducing nutrient loss. And then in the afternoon, there's going to be a communications training on edge of field practices that's led by Iowa State University's Catherine DeLong. Breakfast, a light breakfast and lunch are included, so registration is required, and I'll put the registration link in the chat if anybody is interested.
Perfect. Thanks, Rachel. Next big event that we've got coming up also is the risk management conference that we do every other year. So this year the theme is Future Proof Your Farm. So we're going to have 3 sessions, once on the 1st of August, 8th of August, and the 15th. That's going to run for an hour and a half. And like our usual format for that, we're going to have just a handful of speakers, 2 or 3 per event, followed by a panel discussion. So topics that we're talking about this year is really what is the current status of some of maybe the threats to today's farm operations, and how can conservation help you prepare for how those evolve over time. So we're going to be talking about pests, weather changes and how you can weather those a little better, and then also market changes and sustainable sourcing and what conversations are going on there. So we hope that you join us for that as well. And then next slide. If anyone has any further field days events that are coming up, please feel free to share those. We do have another series coming up here pretty quick. We're going to have a series this summer, an ICCON series, where we cover weeds 1 month, diseases, and then insects, and how those kind of play in a cover crop sustainable system. So we hope you join us for those as well. But I think if there's no other field days or anything coming up that anyone wants to share, I think we will go ahead and close out. Again, this will be posted on our YouTube page. And if there's any questions, we do have a notes there that's been linked in the chat. Any questions, please do feel free to reach out to us. So thanks, everybody.